Iranian state media captured the moment that one of the blasts happened near very crowded streets. You can hear the fear of the screams there. According to Iranian state media, officials describe the explosions. They are calling these explosions a terror attack.
Hundreds of people have been killed and hundreds more are injured in Iran following 2 explosions near the burial site of slain military commander Qasem Soleimani, who was in fact assassinated by the United States under the Trump administration. Now, as you heard from CNN, Iran is referring to these blasts as a terror attack, and the United States is denying any involvement in this, which I'm happy to hear them say. Now, the death toll is expected to rise, with many injured in critical condition. But as of now, at least 103 people were killed Wednesday and 171 injured in the Iranian city of Kerman following the twin blasts. The blasts, at least one of which was caused by a bomb, state TV said, came on the 4th anniversary of Soleimani's death in a US airstrike and threatens to accelerate tensions in the region that have spiked since the start of the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. Now, the first explosion took place about 2,300 feet or 700 meters from Soleimani's grave. And then the second blast was about half a mile away as pilgrims were visiting that site. Now, Iranian officials told state media that a pair of bombs were placed in bags along the road toward the cemetery in the city of Kerman. The bags exploded as a huge procession of people was on its way there to commemorate the 4-year anniversary of the assassination by the US of General Soleimani, the architect of the axis of regional militias and powers that oppose Israel and the United States. So you can understand why the US felt the need to come out and deny any involvement in these blasts. Obviously, the US has been an enemy of Iran's and vice versa. And so the US wanted to make sure that there was no mistake about it and that we didn't plan these blasts. A second delayed explosion is a common tactic that often happens with terrorist groups, and they're intended to inflict more harm by targeting the first responders, the individuals who try to help the victims of the first blast, which is absolutely sick. While no group has claimed responsibility for the attack, Iran's president seemed to blame the country's arch rivals, the United States and Israel. Quote, "We tell the criminal American Zionist regime that you will pay a very high price for the crimes you have committed and will regret it," he said. Right now, we do not have any idea who carried out this attack. We just don't. And so blaming it on Israel or the United States, in my opinion, is ridiculous. We obviously need more evidence of that. But I do also want to note that there are some reasons for why Iran would suspect that Israel is behind it, especially since this is a day after Israel carried out a drone strike in Lebanon, taking out a Hamas commander and several other Hamas militants. Now, Israel, last week, for instance, Iran and several of its armed proxies accused Israel of assassinating a senior Iranian commander in Syria, vowing retaliation. Israel didn't comment on the matter, but it is widely accepted that Israel was in fact behind that strike in Syria. Israel also accuses Tehran of funding and arming Hamas, and their actions show that they're provoking a broader regional war that the United States is getting dragged into. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said last month that his country is in a multi-arena war, being attacked from 7 arenas, including Iran. Quote, "We have already responded and acted in 6 of these decrees," he said. But over the holiday weekend, the United States military sank 3 boats belonging to Iranian-backed Houthi rebels and also killed 10 of their militants. So in response to that, Iran ended up sending one of their warships to the Red Sea. So these are the escalations that make some wonder if the US and Israel were behind these explosions. But it's important to remember, guys, that there are also competing factions within Iran. So the bombings could have been carried out internally. I also want to just comment on the nature of these bombings. It's not really indicative of how Israel carries out attacks. The attack that they carried out in Lebanon was very targeted, extremely precise. Not a single Lebanese civilian died as a result of that. And even though they have a history of carrying out strikes that kill various individuals in other sovereign countries, which could be a disastrous escalation of war, they don't carry it out in this way. So I do think that there are some signs that Israel wasn't behind this. So I would just caution anyone from jumping to any conclusion at the moment. The story still needs to develop. We need to have a better idea and see more evidence of who might be behind it. But in the past, Sunni terrorist groups like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, as well as Iranian opposition militant groups such as Jundallah and another one, MEK, have staged attacks intended to kill civilians. In 2017, the Islamic State, for instance, had launched twin attacks in Tehran, killing 12 people in strikes on parliament and the mausoleum of Ayatollah Khomeini. And again, the way that this was carried out was in fact distinct from how Israel goes after targets in Israel. The attack did not fit Israel's usual methods when striking Iran, said Ali Vaez, the Iran project director at Crisis Group. Israel, he said, has not previously attacked ordinary civilians in Iran, tending instead to target individuals such as nuclear scientists and senior security officials or facilities such as nuclear sites in precision strikes. So they are more likely to carry out precision strikes like the one they carried out in Lebanon just a day ago. And so that's something to keep in mind as this story develops. But for now, the region feels less stable, feels like conflict is escalating. And that is terrifying when you consider the United States and its robust support for Israel and anything Israel does. So this might not be related to Israel at all, but it does feel like conflict is escalating overall in the region. And that is something to be concerned about. And by the way, in regard to the US and its relations with Iran, obviously that relationship continues to deteriorate as the United States continues to try to protect Israel in the Red Sea area. And Iran basically sends out its warships following the US killing 10 Houthi militants. So we'll see how this all plays out, but things are not looking good for the region. And just when you think that Biden should get credit for pulling troops out of Afghanistan and ending that endless war, which felt like an endless war, we're carrying out airstrikes in Iraq again. It's just a complete and utter mess.
Thanks for watching. If you become a member, you get to watch all this ad-free, except for, of course, this ad. Still, hit the join button below.